In the heart of the kingdom of Valdoria, where golden spires pierce the clouds, and ancient traditions rule with iron fists, a single whispered confession in a moonlit corridor would bring down centuries of royal protocol. When a trusted palace guard discovered something that shattered his loyalty forever, the very foundation of the monarchy trembled. What he witnessed behind the gilded doors of the royal nursery would force a prince to choose between his crown and his conscience, setting in motion a chain of events that would reshape the kingdom forever. The autumn rain drummed against the tall windows of Valdoria Palace as Captain Marcus Thorne completed his final patrol of the evening. 20 years of faithful service to the royal family had taught him to move through the corridors like a shadow, his boots making barely a whisper against the marble floors. The palace slept peacefully around him, its inhabitants secure in their beds, trusting in the protection he and his fellow guards provided. Marcus had served 3 generations of the Valdorian royal family. He had protected King Edmund during the border wars, stood vigil over Queen Isabella during her difficult pregnancies, and watched Prince Alexander grow from a mischievous child into a thoughtful heir to the throne. But it was the newest generation that had truly captured his heart, Princess Charlotte, Prince Alexander's 7-year-old daughter, whose infectious laughter could brighten even the gloomiest palace day. As he approached the residential wing, Marcus noticed something unusual. A thin line of light escaped from beneath the door of the staff quarters where Madame Cordelia, the head governess, resided. It was well past midnight, and the elderly woman was known for keeping strict bedtime hours. Concerned that she might be ill, Marcus knocked softly on the door. "Madame Cordelia? Is everything well?" The door opened a crack, revealing the governess's pale face. Her usually immaculate grey hair hung loose around her shoulders, and her hands trembled as she clutched her silk robe. "Captain Thorne," she whispered, glancing nervously down the corridor. I need to speak with someone. I cannot bear this burden alone any longer." Marcus had known Cordelia for 15 years. She was a woman of unshakable composure, someone who had managed the household through royal scandals, political upheavals, and family tragedies without ever losing her dignity. Seeing her in such distress immediately put him on high alert. "What's troubling you, madam?" She hesitated, her eyes darting left and right as if expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. "Not here," she finally said. "The garden pavilion in 10 minutes. And, Captain, tell no one you've seen me tonight." The request sent a chill through Marcus's spine, but he nodded. Cordelia closed the door, leaving him standing alone in the dimly lit corridor with a growing sense of unease. In all his years of service, he had never seen the governess so frightened. 10 minutes later, Marcus found Cordelia waiting in the small pavilion at the center of the palace's rose garden. The structure provided shelter from the rain while offering privacy from any potential eavesdroppers. She paced back and forth, her silk slippers silent against the stone floor. "Madam, you're scaring me," Marcus said gently. "What's happened?" Cordelia stopped pacing and turned to face him, tears streaming down her withered cheeks. "It's Princess Charlotte," she whispered. "Captain, I fear for that child's life." Marcus felt his blood run cold. "What do you mean? Has someone threatened her?" "Not in the way you're thinking," Cordelia replied, wringing her hands. "The threat comes from within the palace itself. From those who should be protecting her most." She took a shuddering breath before continuing. "For the past 3 days, Princess Charlotte has been confined to her chambers as punishment for what Lady Evangeline called inappropriate behavior during the state dinner. The child accidentally spilled juice on the Duchess of Marlborough's gown and was deemed to have embarrassed the royal family." Marcus frowned. Lady Evangeline was Prince Alexander's wife, Charlotte's stepmother, who had married into the royal family 2 years earlier after the tragic death of Charlotte's mother in a riding accident. While publicly she appeared to be a devoted stepmother, Marcus had noticed subtle changes in the palace dynamics since her arrival. "A 3-day confinement seems excessive for such a minor incident," Marcus said carefully. "That's not the worst of it," Cordelia continued, her voice breaking. "As part of her punishment, Lady Evangeline ordered that Charlotte receive only water during her confinement. No food whatsoever. She claims it will teach the child discipline and help her understand the consequences of bringing shame upon the royal family." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. 3 days without food? But she's only 7 years old. "I know," Cordelia sobbed. "I've tried to speak with Prince Alexander, but Lady Evangeline has convinced him that Charlotte needs firm discipline to prepare her for her royal duties. She's told him that his late wife was too permissive and that Charlotte will grow up to be a disgrace to the crown if harsh measures aren't taken now." Marcus struggled to process what he was hearing. The idea that anyone would deliberately starve a child, especially Princess Charlotte, seemed impossible to believe. Yet he knew Cordelia would never lie about something so serious. "Where is Prince Alexander now?" Marcus asked. "He left this morning for the northern provinces to inspect the flood damage from last week's storms. He won't return for 4 days. Lady Evangeline is effectively in charge of the palace in his absence. And the other staff members? Surely they've noticed?" Cordelia shook her head bitterly. "Lady Evangeline has been very clever about this. She's told everyone that Charlotte is ill with a stomach ailment and needs to rest. Only I know the truth because I'm responsible for the child's daily care. The kitchen staff has been instructed to prepare only broth for Charlotte's meals, which I'm supposed to encourage her to sip slowly to avoid upsetting her delicate stomach. But even that small mercy has been denied to her for the past 3 days." Marcus felt a surge of anger, unlike anything he'd experienced in years of military service. The idea of Princess Charlotte, with her bright smile and curious nature, suffering alone in her chambers while the rest of the palace went about their daily routines, was unbearable. "Why are you telling me this, Madame Cordelia?" "Because I don't know what else to do," she admitted. "If I directly disobey Lady Evangeline's orders, I'll be dismissed immediately. I'm 63 years old, Captain. I have no family, no savings beyond what the royal household provides. This position is my entire life. But I cannot stand by and watch that innocent child suffer." "What do you want me to do?" Cordelia looked at him with desperate hope in her eyes. "You're the head of palace security. You have the authority to check on all residents for safety reasons. You could discover the situation accidentally and then be duty-bound to report it to Prince Alexander immediately." Marcus considered her words carefully. What she was suggesting would put his own position at risk, but the thought of Charlotte suffering in silence made the decision easy. "I'll need proof," he said finally. "Lady Evangeline is clever, as you said. She'll deny everything and claim we're conspiring against her. I have the written orders she gave me regarding Charlotte's punishment," Cordelia said, reaching into her robe pocket. She wanted everything documented to show Prince Alexander how seriously she takes the child's behavioral correction. She handed him a folded piece of paper bearing the royal seal. Marcus unfolded it and read Lady Evangeline's precise handwriting by the light of his small torch. The contents were even worse than Cordelia had described, outlining not just the food restriction, but also complete isolation from all companionship and entertainment. "This is monstrous," Marcus whispered. "Will you help her, Captain?" Marcus folded the letter carefully and placed it in his jacket pocket. "I'll do more than that, Madame Cordelia. I'll make sure Prince Alexander knows exactly what kind of woman he married." As they left the pavilion and returned to the palace, neither of them noticed the figure watching from an upper-floor window. Lady Evangeline stood motionless behind the curtains, her calculating eyes tracking their movement across the moonlit garden. She had suspected that the elderly governess might eventually become a problem, but she hadn't anticipated the involvement of the palace guard captain. No matter. Lady Evangeline had not climbed from minor nobility to become a future queen by allowing obstacles to stand in her way. If Captain Thorne wanted to play the hero, she would be happy to provide him with a villain worthy of his efforts. The game was about to become much more dangerous for everyone involved. Dawn broke grey and cold over Valdoria Palace as Captain Marcus Thorne prepared for what might be the most important mission of his career. He had spent the remainder of the night planning his approach, knowing that he would have only one chance to document the truth before Lady Evangeline could cover her tracks. Marcus's first stop was the palace kitchen, where he found Chef Henri already preparing breakfast for the royal household. The rotund Frenchman had served the family for nearly as long as Marcus himself, and was known for his fierce devotion to everyone under the palace roof. "Henry, I need to ask you about Princess Charlotte's meals," Marcus said, keeping his voice casual. The chef's face immediately clouded with concern. "Ah, the poor little one. Lady Evangeline tells me she has been very sick with stomach troubles. I prepare special broth, very light, but even that she cannot keep down. It breaks my heart." "When did you last prepare a full meal for the princess?" Henry paused in his chopping, his brow furrowing as he considered the question. "Let me think." "It was Sunday evening before the state dinner. Since then, only the broth. Lady Evangeline says the child's stomach is too delicate for solid food. 3 days, just as Cordelia had said." Marcus felt his anger building again, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Has anyone from the princess's chambers returned empty dishes?" "None. That is what puzzles me." Henry admitted. Usually when someone is sick, they manage at least a few spoonfuls of broth, but every bowl I send up comes back completely untouched. I worry that she grows weaker. Marcus thanked the chef and made his way to the residential wing, his hand unconsciously checking for the letter in his pocket. As he climbed the grand staircase, he passed several maids and footmen, all of whom greeted him with their usual respectful nods. None of them seemed aware that anything was amiss. Princess Charlotte's chambers were located in the East Wing, in a suite of rooms that had been specially decorated when she turned 5. Marcus had often seen her racing through these hallways, her golden curls bouncing as she chased after her pet spaniel, or hurried to show someone a new drawing she had completed. The silence that now filled these corridors felt unnatural and oppressive. He paused outside Charlotte's door and listened carefully. From within came the faint sound of weeping, soft, heartbroken sobs that would have gone unnoticed by anyone passing quickly by. Marcus felt something break inside his chest as he realized that Princess Charlotte was crying alone in her room, probably weak from hunger and confused about why she was being punished so severely. Before he could knock, footsteps echoed from the main corridor. Marcus quickly stepped into an alcove as Lady Evangeline appeared, accompanied by her personal maid, Giselle. Even at this early hour, Lady Evangeline looked perfectly composed, her auburn hair arranged in an elaborate style and her emerald silk dress immaculate. "Remember, Giselle," she was saying in her crisp accent, "Princess Charlotte is still recovering from her illness. She's not to have any visitors except for Madame Cordelia, and only for essential care. The child needs complete rest to recover her strength." "Yes, my lady," Giselle replied. "And the prince's return? Prince Alexander won't be back until Friday. By then, Charlotte will have learned valuable lessons about proper behavior, and this entire incident will be behind us." Lady Evangeline paused at Charlotte's door, her hand on the ornate handle. "In fact, I think it's time I checked on her progress myself." Marcus watched from his hiding place as Lady Evangeline entered Charlotte's chambers, leaving Giselle to wait in the corridor. He could hear muffled conversation from within, Lady Evangeline's stern voice and Charlotte's higher, trembling responses. After several minutes, Lady Evangeline emerged, her expression satisfied. "The child is learning humility," she announced to Giselle. "Perhaps by tomorrow she'll be ready to apologize properly for her behavior." As they walked away, Marcus waited until their footsteps faded before approaching Charlotte's door. He knocked gently, then used his master key to enter. The sight that greeted him nearly brought tears to his eyes. Princess Charlotte sat on her bed, still wearing the same dress she had worn to the state dinner 3 nights earlier. The vibrant blue silk was now wrinkled and stained, and the child herself looked pale and listless. When she saw Marcus, her face lit up with desperate hope. "Captain Marcus," she exclaimed, though her voice was weak. "Have you come to take me to Papa?" "I've been very good. Truly I have. I haven't left my room even once, just like Lady Evangeline said." Marcus knelt beside the bed, his heart breaking at the sight of Charlotte's thin face. "Hello, little princess. How are you feeling?" "I'm very hungry," Charlotte admitted in a small voice. "And I'm sorry about spilling the juice." "I didn't mean to make the Duchess angry. I told Lady Evangeline I was sorry, but she says I have to prove I mean it by being patient and quiet." "When did you last eat something, Charlotte?" The little girl's brow furrowed as she tried to remember. "I think it was Sunday night, after the dinner. Cookie gave me some cake in the kitchen, but then Lady Evangeline said I was sick and couldn't have any more food until my tummy felt better." Marcus had to clench his fists to control his rage. The child clearly had no understanding that she was being deliberately starved as punishment. She believed she was actually ill, and that the food restriction was for her own good. "Princess, I need to ask you some questions, and I want you to tell me the truth, all right?" Charlotte nodded eagerly, trusting him completely. "Has Lady Evangeline explained why you can't leave your room?" "She says I brought shame to our family by being clumsy at the dinner. She says Papa would be very disappointed in me if he knew how badly I behaved. She's helping me learn to be a better princess by teaching me patience and self-discipline." "And how do you feel? Are you tired, weak?" "Very tired," Charlotte admitted. "And sometimes I feel dizzy when I stand up. But Lady Evangeline says that's because I'm sick, and if I'm very good and very patient, I'll get better soon." Marcus felt sick to his stomach. The manipulation was even more cruel than he had imagined. Lady Evangeline had convinced Charlotte that her suffering was both deserved and beneficial, preventing the child from even understanding that she was being abused. "Charlotte, I want you to know that your papa loves you very much, and he would never want you to go hungry. What happened at the dinner was just an accident. and no one is angry with you about it. For the first time since he'd entered the room, Charlotte looked confused. But Lady Evangeline said, "I know what she said, Princess. But sometimes adults make mistakes too. I'm going to make sure you get something to eat right away, and then we're going to wait for your papa to come home so you can tell him everything that's happened." Before Charlotte could respond, the door burst open and Lady Evangeline strode in, her face a mask of cold fury. "Captain Thorne, what is the meaning of this intrusion?" "I specifically instructed that Princess Charlotte was not to be disturbed." Marcus rose to his feet, placing himself between Lady Evangeline and Charlotte. "I was conducting the routine security check when I heard the princess crying. As head of palace security, the welfare of all residents falls under my jurisdiction." "The princess is recovering from an illness," Lady Evangeline said icily. "Your presence here is unnecessary and potentially harmful to her health." "What illness exactly?" Marcus challenged. "Because from where I stand, it looks like this child is suffering from hunger, not sickness." Lady Evangeline's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Captain, you are overstepping your authority. Princess Charlotte is my stepdaughter, and her care is my responsibility in her father's absence. I'll ask you to leave immediately." "I'm afraid I can't do that," Marcus replied calmly. "Not until Prince Alexander returns and can assess the situation himself." The standoff lasted several long seconds, with Charlotte watching fearfully from her bed. Finally, Lady Evangeline smiled, a cold, calculating expression that sent chills down Marcus's spine. "Very well, Captain. If you insist on interfering in family matters, then you leave me no choice but to report your insubordination to Prince Alexander immediately. I'm sure he'll be very interested to learn that his trusted guard captain has been conspiring with disgruntled staff members to undermine his wife's authority." Marcus realized that Lady Evangeline somehow knew about his conversation with Madame Cordelia, but he refused to back down. "Report whatever you like. Prince Alexander will want to hear all the facts when he returns." "Oh, he will indeed," Lady Evangeline agreed. "Giselle," she called, and her maid appeared instantly. "Please send word to Prince Alexander that Captain Thorne has become a security risk to the royal family. Inform him that immediate action is required upon his return." As Lady Evangeline swept from the room, Marcus knew that he had just declared war on one of the most powerful women in the kingdom. But as he looked at Princess Charlotte's frightened face, he realized he would do it all over again without hesitation. The battle for Charlotte's safety had only just begun. The emergency message reached Prince Alexander while he was inspecting flood damage in the northern village of Millbrook. The royal courier, mud splattered from his urgent ride, delivered Lady Evangeline's letter with trembling hands, aware that interrupting the prince's humanitarian mission indicated a crisis of the highest magnitude. Alexander read the message twice before the words fully registered. According to his wife, Captain Marcus Thorne had experienced what she delicately termed a mental breakdown, brought on by years of military stress. She wrote that the captain had become paranoid and delusional, convinced that she was somehow harming Princess Charlotte. Most alarmingly, she reported that Thorne had potentially compromised palace security by sharing classified information with unreliable staff members. The prince's first instinct was disbelief. Marcus Thorne had been like a second father to him, a steady presence throughout his childhood, and a trusted advisor during his transition to heir apparent. The idea that this pillar of strength had suddenly become unstable seemed impossible. Yet Lady Evangeline's letter was detailed and persuasive. She described specific incidents of erratic behavior, documented conversations that seemed to support her claims, and expressed genuine concern for both the captain's well-being and the safety of the royal family. She had even included supporting statements from several staff members who had allegedly witnessed Thorne's declining mental state. Alexander's hand shook as he folded the letter. If Lady Evangeline's assessment was accurate, then his daughter might be in danger from the very person he had trusted to protect her. The thought made him physically ill. "Your Highness," said Sir Edmund Blackwood, his private secretary and oldest friend, "the situation must be quite serious for Lady Evangeline to send such an urgent message." Alexander looked up from the letter, his face pale with worry. "Edmund, prepare the horses immediately. We're returning to the capital tonight." "But sir, the flood victims are expecting your address tomorrow morning. The relief coordination can be handled by the regional administrators," Alexander finished curtly. "My family needs me more than these people need ceremonial visits." The journey back to Valdoria took 8 hours of hard riding through increasingly treacherous weather. Alexander's mind raced with possibilities during the long trek, each scenario more disturbing than the last. He had noticed that Marcus seemed somewhat withdrawn in recent months, but he had attributed this to the normal wear of a demanding position. Could he have missed signs of serious mental disturbance? More troubling still were his growing doubts about his own judgment regarding his wife. Lady Evangeline had brought significant political advantages to their marriage. Her family's connections had strengthened Valdoria's position with several neighboring kingdoms, and her social graces had enhanced the royal family's reputation abroad. But Alexander had to admit that their relationship had remained somewhat formal despite 2 years of marriage. He had married Evangeline partly out of duty and partly from loneliness following his first wife's tragic death. Princess Charlotte had been only 5 when her mother died, and Alexander had convinced himself that she needed a maternal figure in her life. Evangeline had seemed genuinely fond of Charlotte during their courtship, often bringing her gifts and spending time reading to her. But lately, Alexander had noticed subtle changes in Charlotte's behavior. She had become quieter, more withdrawn, especially around her stepmother. When he asked about it, Evangeline always had reasonable explanations. Charlotte was simply adjusting to new expectations, learning proper royal protocols, growing out of childish habits. Alexander had accepted these explanations, grateful that someone was taking charge of his daughter's education while he managed affairs of state. Now, racing through the storm-lashed countryside, he wondered if he had been criminally naive. The palace came into view just after midnight, its windows glowing warmly against the dark sky. Alexander dismounted in the courtyard and strode quickly through the main entrance, still wearing his mud-stained traveling clothes. Several guards snapped to attention as he passed, but he barely acknowledged them. He found Lady Evangeline waiting in the blue salon, elegant despite the late hour, in a deep purple gown that emphasized her striking features. She rose gracefully as he entered, her expression perfectly calibrated to convey concern mixed with relief. "Alexander, thank goodness you're home safely," she said, moving to embrace him. "I was so worried about you traveling in this terrible weather." "Where is Captain Thorne?" Alexander asked without preamble. "Confined to quarters under guard, as I instructed in my second message," Evangeline replied smoothly. "I felt it was the safest option for everyone involved until you could return to handle the situation personally. And Charlotte?" "Sleeping peacefully, finally. The poor child was quite distressed by Captain Thorne's erratic behavior earlier today. I've had Dr. Whitmore examine her to ensure she suffered no lasting effects from the experience." Alexander studied his wife's face carefully. Everything she said sounded reasonable, but something in her manner struck him as rehearsed. "I want to see her, of course, but perhaps you should change out of those wet clothes first. And, Dr. Whitmore is waiting in the study with his report on both Charlotte's condition and his professional assessment of Captain Thorne's mental state. The doctor can wait. I need to see my daughter first." For just a moment, something flickered across Evangeline's features, surprise perhaps or calculation. But it was gone so quickly that Alexander couldn't be sure he had seen it at all. "Very well," she said, "but please try not to wake her. She's had such a trying few days with her illness." Alexander paused at the doorway. "What illness? Didn't I mention it in my letter?" "Charlotte has been suffering from a stomach ailment since Sunday evening. Nothing serious, but it's left her quite weak and emotional. Dr. Whitmore believes it may have made her more susceptible to being frightened by Captain Thorne's strange behavior." As they climbed the stairs toward Charlotte's chambers, Alexander noticed that the palace seemed unusually quiet. Normally, even at this late hour, there would be signs of life, servants completing their duties, guards changing shifts, the ordinary sounds of a busy household. Tonight, the silence felt oppressive. They reached Charlotte's door, and Evangeline placed her hand on Alexander's arm. "Please remember, she's been quite fragile. Try not to alarm her with too many questions about today's incident." Alexander nodded and quietly opened the door. Charlotte's chambers were dimly lit by a single lamp near her bed, casting long shadows across the room. As his eyes adjusted, Alexander could see his daughter's small form beneath the covers, her golden hair spread across the pillow. He approached the bed carefully, not wanting to wake her if she was truly asleep. But as he drew closer, Charlotte's eyes opened, and her face lit up with joy. "Papa," she whispered, struggling to sit up. "You came home!" Alexander was immediately struck by how thin and pale Charlotte looked. Her face, usually round and rosy with health, seemed gaunt, and her movements were slow and uncertain. "Hello, my darling," he said softly, settling on the edge of her bed. "How are you feeling?" "Much better now that you're here," Charlotte said, reaching for his hand. Her grip was weak, he noticed, and her skin felt cold. "Papa, I tried so hard to be good while you were away. I stayed in my room just like Lady Evangeline said, even though I got very hungry. Alexander felt a chill that had nothing to do with his wet clothes. Hungry? But I thought you were ill and couldn't eat. Charlotte looked confused. Lady Evangeline said I couldn't have any food because I was being punished for spilling juice on the Duchess. She said you would be angry with me if you knew how badly I behaved. The room seemed to spin around Alexander, as the full implication of Charlotte's words hit him. He glanced back at Lady Evangeline, who stood frozen in the doorway, her face a mask of barely controlled panic. Charlotte, Alexander said gently, trying to keep his voice steady. When did you last eat a full meal? Sunday night, after the steak dinner, Charlotte replied readily. Cookie gave me cake in the kitchen. But then Lady Evangeline explained that I needed to learn discipline, so I couldn't have any more food until I proved I was sorry. Alexander rose slowly from the bed, his hands clenched into fists. When he turned to face his wife, his eyes blazed with a fury that made her take an involuntary step backward. Evangeline, he said in a voice of deadly calm, I think we need to have a conversation. The confrontation in Prince Alexander's private study would later be remembered by those present as one of the most explosive in the palace's long history. Lady Evangeline sat rigidly upright in a leather chair, her perfect composure finally beginning to crack under the weight of her husband's accusations. Across from her, Prince Alexander paced like a caged wolf, his wet hair disheveled and his face pale with exhausted rage. 3 days, he repeated for the 4th time, his voice growing more dangerous with each repetition. You starved my 7-year-old daughter for 3 days over a spilled drink. Alexander, you're being dramatic, Evangeline replied, though her usual smooth confidence had developed a tremor. Charlotte was being disciplined, not starved. The temporary food restriction was meant to teach her the consequences of bringing shame to the royal family. My own governess used similar methods when I was a child, and they made me into the woman I am today. The woman you are today, Alexander said slowly, is someone who tortures children. The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Evangeline's face went white, then flushed red with indignation. How dare you speak to me that way? I am your wife, your queen-to-be. Everything I did was for the good of this family and this kingdom. Charlotte needs to learn proper discipline if she's ever going to be worthy of her royal bloodline. She's 7 years old, Alexander roared, his composure finally shattering completely. She's a child who made an innocent mistake and you nearly killed her for it. I did no such thing. A few missed meals never killed anyone. My stepmother subjected me to far worse, and it made me strong, refined, capable of handling the pressures of royal life. Alexander stopped pacing and stared at his wife with dawning horror. Your stepmother abused you, and instead of recognizing it as wrong, you've decided to repeat the cycle with my daughter?
It wasn't abuse. Evangeline snapped. It was education.
Charlotte is weak because her mother coddled her. Someone needs to prepare her for the realities of royal duty, and if you're too sentimental to do it, then that responsibility falls to me. The mention of his deceased first wife sent Alexander over the edge. Don't you ever speak about Catherine again, he said in a voice that made the temperature in the room seem to drop several degrees. She loved Charlotte unconditionally, as any parent should. What you did was not parenting, it was cruelty. Before Evangeline could respond, there was a knock at the study door. Dr. Whitmore entered, carrying his medical bag and looking deeply troubled. Behind him came Captain Marcus Thorne, flanked by 2 guards. Your Highness, Doctor, Whitmore said gravely, I've completed my examination of Princess Charlotte, and I'm afraid the situation is quite serious. Alexander's heart lurched. Is she all right?
She will recover, but only because you returned when you did.
The princess is suffering from acute dehydration and malnutrition. Her blood sugar levels are dangerously low, and she's showing early signs of muscle weakness. Another day or 2 without food could have caused permanent damage or even... The doctor's voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. You're exaggerating, Evangeline said sharply. Children are more resilient than you think. A little discipline never hurt anyone. Doctor, Whitmore turned to her with barely concealed disgust. Madam, I have been practicing medicine for 30 years, and I can assure you that deliberate starvation of a child is never acceptable under any circumstances. What was done to Princess Charlotte constitutes severe abuse. And what about Captain Thorne? Alexander asked, looking at Marcus with new understanding. I was told he had suffered a mental breakdown. Marcus stepped forward, his posture straight despite the obvious exhaustion on his face. Your Highness, I am in complete control of my faculties. I confronted Lady Evangeline because I discovered what she was doing to Princess Charlotte. I have written documentation of her orders, as well as testimony from Madame Cordelia, who witnessed the entire incident. He handed Alexander the letter that Cordelia had given him the night before. As the prince read Lady Evangeline's detailed instructions for Charlotte's punishment, his face grew progressively darker. "This is monstrous," Alexander whispered. "Complete isolation, no food, no comfort, no explanation to the child about when her suffering would end." "I was teaching her discipline," Evangeline repeated, but her voice now sounded hollow and defensive. "You were breaking her spirit," Marcus said firmly. "I've seen prisoners of war treated with more compassion than you showed that little girl." Alexander looked up from the letter, his decision crystallizing in his mind. "Guards, place Lady Evangeline under arrest for child abuse and endangerment of a royal family member." "You cannot be serious." Evangeline leaped to her feet, her carefully maintained facade finally crumbling entirely. "I am your wife. I am going to be queen of this kingdom. You are a danger to my daughter and a disgrace to everything this crown represents," Alexander replied coldly. "Guards." 2 palace guards stepped forward, but Evangeline backed away from them, her eyes wild with panic and rage. "You'll regret this, Alexander," she hissed. "My family has connections throughout the continent. When they learn how you've treated me, how you've chosen a mere child over your wife, they'll withdraw their support from this pathetic kingdom. You'll have nothing." "I'll have my daughter," Alexander said simply. "That's worth more than all the political alliances in the world." As the guards moved to restrain her, Evangeline made one final desperate play. "And what will happen to Charlotte when the other kingdoms refuse to trade with Valdoria? When the economy collapses and people starve because you chose sentiment over strategy? Will your precious daughter thank you then?" Alexander felt a moment of doubt creep into his mind. Evangeline's family connections had indeed been valuable to Valdoria's international standing. Divorcing her would have serious political consequences that could affect thousands of his subjects. But then he thought of Charlotte's pale, frightened face, of her weak voice saying she had tried so hard to be good, of her confusion about why she was being punished so severely for such a minor accident. No political advantage was worth subjecting a child to such cruelty. "Take her away," he ordered. As Evangeline was led from the room, still protesting her innocence, Alexander turned to Captain Thorne. "Marcus, I owe you an apology and my eternal gratitude. If you hadn't acted when you did, you don't owe me anything, Your Highness. I was just doing my job, protecting the royal family from threats. I never imagined the threat would come from within the palace itself." "What made you realize what was happening?" Marcus glanced at Dr. Whitmore before answering. "Madame Cordelia came to me. She was torn between her loyalty to you and her conscience regarding Princess Charlotte's welfare. She made the brave choice to speak up, even though she knew it could cost her everything. Where is Madame Cordelia now?" "Sitting with Princess Charlotte, helping her take small sips of broth. The poor woman has been tormented by guilt for days, believing she should have acted sooner." Alexander felt a wave of shame wash over him. How many people in his palace had known that Charlotte was suffering while he was away, focused on his duties as prince? How had he failed so completely to protect his own daughter? "Doctor, what does Charlotte need now?" "Rest, nutrition carefully managed to avoid shocking her system, and most importantly, reassurance that she's safe and loved. The physical recovery will take several weeks, but the emotional healing may take much longer." Alexander nodded grimly. He had been so focused on being a good prince that he had forgotten how to be a good father. That was a mistake he would never make again. "One more thing, Your Highness," Marcus said hesitantly. "What are you going to tell the people about Lady Evangeline's arrest? News of this scandal could damage the monarchy's reputation." Alexander considered the question carefully. His first instinct was to protect the crown's image, to find some face-saving explanation that would preserve public confidence in the royal family. But as he thought about Charlotte lying alone and hungry in her room, convinced that her father would be angry with her for a childish accident, he realized that some things mattered more than reputation. "We'll tell the truth," he said finally. "The people of Valdoria deserve to know that their future king puts family before politics, that no one, regardless of their position, is above the law when it comes to protecting children." It was a decision that would reshape not only his family but the entire kingdom in the months to come. 6 months after the revelation that shook the kingdom to its foundations, Princess Charlotte ran through the palace gardens with her spaniel, Perseus, her laughter echoing off the stone walls like music. The sight never failed to bring tears of relief to Captain Marcus Thorne's eyes as he maintained his watchful post near the Rose Pavilion. The physical recovery had been swifter than anyone had dared hope. Under Dr. Whitmore's careful supervision and Chef Henri's enthusiastic attention, Charlotte had regained her strength within weeks. The emotional healing had taken longer, but with patient love from her father, gentle care from Madame Cordelia, and the security of knowing she was truly safe, Charlotte had gradually returned to her former spirited self. Prince Alexander had kept his word about telling the truth to his subjects. The announcement of Lady Evangeline's arrest and the circumstances that led to it had sent shockwaves throughout Valdoria and beyond. Some nobles had privately criticized the prince for airing the royal family's personal troubles so publicly that the common people had rallied around their future king with unprecedented support. The trial had been swift and decisive. Faced with overwhelming evidence, including her own written orders and the testimony of multiple witnesses, Lady Evangeline had been convicted of child abuse and endangerment. Her sentence, permanent exile from Valdoria and dissolution of her marriage to Prince Alexander, had been carried out within a month of her arrest. The political consequences had been severe, but not insurmountable. Evangeline's family had indeed withdrawn their support, taking several trade agreements with them. 2 neighboring kingdoms had expressed concern about Valdoria's stability, and there had been tense negotiations to maintain existing alliances. But something unexpected had happened in the wake of the scandal. Other kingdoms, inspired by Alexander's willingness to prioritize justice over political convenience, had begun reaching out to establish new relationships with Valdoria. The Kingdom of Astoria, previously neutral in continental politics, had offered a comprehensive trade partnership. The Republic of Meridian had proposed a cultural exchange program. Most surprisingly, the Empire of Solaris, Valdoria's traditional rival, had sent envoys to discuss a historic peace treaty. It seems, Sir Edmund Blackwood had observed during a recent council meeting, that moral leadership is its own form of political power. Alexander had been privately skeptical of this assessment until a letter arrived from Queen Isabella of Astoria. The Queen, herself a mother of 3 young children, wrote that she had been moved by Alexander's decision to protect his daughter regardless of the cost. She expressed her hope that Valdoria and Astoria could build a new kind of international relationship based on shared values rather than mere convenience. The letter now sat framed on Alexander's desk as a reminder that doing the right thing often yielded unexpected rewards. The changes within the palace had been just as dramatic. Madame Cordelia, initially terrified that she would be dismissed for her role in the scandal, had instead been promoted to Chief of Household Staff, with specific responsibility for child welfare oversight. Her first act in the new position had been to establish clear protocols for any situation where a child's well-being might be at risk. Captain Thorne had been awarded the Order of Valdorian Valor, the kingdom's highest civilian honor, in recognition of his courage in protecting Princess Charlotte. More importantly to him personally, Alexander had asked him to serve as Charlotte's primary security detail, a position that allowed him to maintain the close relationship he had always shared with the little princess. Chef Henri had taken Charlotte under his culinary wing, teaching her to bake bread and prepare simple meals. The princess had shown unexpected talent in the kitchen, and her creations, however lopsided or overseasoned, were now regular features at the family dinner table. Dr. Whitmore had been appointed royal physician, with expanded authority to conduct regular health assessments of all palace residents, including unannounced visits to ensure everyone's well-being. His first comprehensive report had led to improved working conditions for staff members and better medical care for elderly servants. But the most significant changes had occurred in the relationship between Alexander and Charlotte. The prince had restructured his schedule to ensure he spent several hours each day with his daughter, whether helping with the lessons, taking walks through the gardens, or simply reading together in his study. He had also begun including Charlotte in age-appropriate aspects of royal duties, teaching her about the responsibilities that would one day be hers, while ensuring she understood that being a good person mattered more than being a perfect princess. "Papa," Charlotte said one evening as they sat together in the library, "do you think Lady Evangeline is sorry for what she did?" Alexander looked up from the state papers he was reviewing, struck once again by his daughter's capacity for empathy, even towards someone who had hurt her so deeply. "I don't know, sweetheart," he said honestly. "Some people find it hard to admit when they've done wrong, even to themselves. But what matters is that you're safe now and that we've learned to be better at taking care of each other." "I hope she finds someone to teach her how to be kind," Charlotte said thoughtfully. Maybe then she won't want to hurt children anymore. Alexander marveled at his daughter's wisdom. Even after everything she had endured, Charlotte chose compassion over resentment, hope over bitterness. It was a lesson he tried to carry with him in his own struggles to forgive himself for failing to recognize the danger she had been in. The therapy sessions with Dr. Whitmore had helped both of them process the trauma of those 3 terrible days. Charlotte had learned that she had done nothing wrong and that adult problems were never her fault. Alexander had learned to recognize the signs of emotional manipulation and to trust his own instincts about his daughter's well-being. Your Highness, Marcus appeared in the library doorway. I have the evening security report. And I have a new drawing to show you, Captain Marcus. Charlotte jumped up from her chair, clutching a piece of paper covered in colorful crayon marks. Marcus solemnly examined the artwork, which appeared to depict Perseus chasing butterflies through a field of enormous flowers. This is magnificent, Princess. Perseus looks very brave and fast. He is. And see, these are the roses from our garden, except I made them bigger so Perseus wouldn't get lost among them. As Marcus and Charlotte discussed the finer points of artistic interpretation, Alexander reflected on how much stronger and happier they all were now. The palace felt alive again, filled with the sounds of Charlotte's laughter and the easy camaraderie of staff members who no longer walked on eggshells around a volatile authority figure. There had been difficult moments during the recovery period. Charlotte had suffered nightmares for several weeks, waking up afraid that she was still trapped in her room waiting for an explanation of what she had done wrong. Alexander had slept in a chair beside her bed until the dreams faded, holding her hand whenever she stirred restlessly. There had also been moments of doubt about his decision to expose the family's private trauma so publicly. During particularly challenging diplomatic meetings, or when faced with economic complications resulting from broken alliances, Alexander had wondered if he should have found a quieter way to handle Lady Evangeline's crimes. But watching Charlotte now, confident and happy and secure in her father's love, he knew he had made the right choice. A kingdom built on the foundation of protecting its most vulnerable citizens was a kingdom worth ruling. Papa, Charlotte said, returning to his side with her drawing, when I'm queen someday, I want to make sure all children are safe and have enough to eat. That sounds like an excellent priority for a future ruler, Alexander replied, pulling her onto his lap. What else do you want to do when you're queen? I want to have a big kitchen where children can come learn to cook if their families don't have enough food. And I want every palace to have someone like Captain Marcus to make sure everyone is being kind to each other. Alexander exchanged a meaningful look with Marcus over Charlotte's head. The little girl's instinctive understanding of justice and compassion suggested that Valdoria's future would be in very good hands indeed. As the evening shadows lengthened across the library floor, Alexander held his daughter close and felt, for the first time since his wife Catherine's death, that his family was truly whole again. They had survived their darkest hour and emerged stronger, wiser, and more committed than ever to protecting what mattered most. The kingdom of Valdoria had learned that true strength came not from political alliances or economic advantages, but from the courage to stand up for those who could not protect themselves. It was a lesson that would guide them through whatever challenges lay ahead. Outside the library windows, the palace gardens bloomed in the gentle twilight, and all was well in the realm.